Hello, welcome to mission briefing for mission 3A Reconnaissance. This mission is an Imperial reconnaissance mission supporting the search for the rebel base in the Nilgard sector. The Imperials have spread their forces across the sector and are using ships retrofitted with reconnaissance packages to collect as much scanning data as possible in a short period of time. And in doing so, they've kind of made themselves vulnerable to rebel attacks on those reconnaissance ships, and that's the scenario we're playing out here. The setup is pretty straightforward. We've got 6 asteroids, starting with the Imperial player, placing those and alternating between the two. And they are beyond range 1 of the table edges and beyond range 1 of each other, and I've populated the board here already with those. After the asteroids are down, the next part, and pretty important part of this scenario, is these tracking tokens here. These are recon scan point tokens. And players also alternate placing these. And the rules for placing these are they have to be beyond range 1 of the table edge and beyond range 3 of each other. So they'll be spread out across the map here. If you can't place the last one or two beyond range 3 of another tracking token, you can cut that down to range 2 instead. And the other thing with those, the last thing with those tokens is that you can't, as a rebel player, you may be tempted to put them on an obstacle to make them harder to scan. You are not allowed to place some overlapping obstacles, but you could place some close to obstacles like this. That's legal. Okay, once your scan points are down, then we start the deployment. First up is the Imperial player. They've got 120 points to spend on their force, so fairly beefy. And they can deploy within the standard range 1 of their table edge, so sort of like a normal deployment here. The only other thing about the Imperials' deployment is that at that time they have to pick one of their ships to be the reconnaissance ship. And I've chosen this TIE bomber here. I've just given this little yellow mark. You can do that by selecting a ship and pressing Control M. You don't have to turn it, but it gives it that little dot there. Whichever ship you designate as your reconnaissance ship, make sure that your opponent knows which one it is and that it is clearly marked, because that is going to be a high value target. You don't want to be going into your first engagement not having already decided which ship that is. That would be very bad. All right. So after you have done that, the rebel player is up for deployment. Now they have a little different deployment setup here. They can actually deploy within range 1 to 3 of their table edge. So they could deploy quite far from their own table edge, so probably about yay far, but within range 3. So they can actually put themselves in a position to engage the Imperial forces within the first couple of turns of play pretty reliably. And that's going to be important for their strategy going forward. And then the last thing to know about the setup is that the Imperial player has the initiative. Alright, let's move into the special rules. There's basically 2 special rules, and they have to do with these recon scan points and the reconnaissance ship. Basically, both rules have to do with picking up those tokens, scanning them as the Imperial player, and there's 2 ways you can do it. First way is by ending overlapping a recon scan point with the ship base. So you could do that by moving onto the token like that, or you can do it like this, where you barrel roll. I'm demonstrating my vassal ineptitude by having to look up that barrel roll. But you can barrel roll onto them and pick them up that way too, with a passive sweep. That is the preferred method for picking up a recon scan point. You can do it one other way. you can do an active sweep. An active sweep is an action, uh, and that reads action remove one recon scan point token at range 1 from the play area and place it near your pile, pile near your pilot cards, which is where you'll be putting these. Every time you scan a recon scan point token, you essentially take it off the board, put a neat little pile as the Imperial player. Then after you pick up that token, you assign yourself stress tokens until you have one stress token. So your recon ship will end up with one stress token there. Some ships have the ability to uh, take those off. I think Captain Euro might be the only one. So uh, I guess I've prepared for the possibility that Captain Euro will show up and try to prevent you from getting stressed for that. But that is that's the extent of the special rules for this scenario. So it's pretty straightforward. Let's go into this scoring real fast. Uh, for each recon scan point in the Imperial player's pile at the end of the game, they score 30 points. Uh, so the Imperial player would score 90 points for this many, for 3. The Rebel player scores points for any reconnaissance scan point token that is still on the table at the end of the game. So they don't have any mechanism to sort of pick these up and put them in their own pile. They have to keep these on the board as the Rebel player. That's how they score those objective points. Players also score points for shooting down enemy ships as normal. So a Rebel player would score, let's call this a 12-point Academy TIE Fighter. Rebel player scores 12 for shooting this down. Also, the Imperial player loses 12 if we have this ship destroyed. Another standard rule that's in effect here is that ships can flee and not count as destroyed, but that is not valid for the first couple turns. So in the first, if you fly off the table like this in the first activation phase, the enemy will score 12 points for this ship here if this ship flew off in the first activation phase. It's important to note that you, as the Imperial player, don't never lose points for flying off a ship off the table, but the Rebel player would score those points. If you wait until the second turn, same deal. Rebel scores the points. You don't lose any points. After the second turn, you can fly off and not lose any points. So you need to hang in there for at least. You need to complete, 2 moves and stay on the table in order to not be penalized for running away. So, pretty straightforward mission, at least in terms of rules. The tricky part is really the strategy with this one, because both players are in an interesting position. The Imperial player has more points at the start of the game, but they also have the liability of this recon ship. Because let's say the Imperial player decides to just go straight at the Rebel player and they have a joust. If the Rebel player is able to concentrate their fire on your reconnaissance ship and take it off the board, then they've essentially scored all the points of these recon scan points. There's no way that you can get these recon scan points off the table and score those points as an Imperial player once your recon ship is gone. So if you go in for an immediate joust and only get like one recon scan point, maybe with a passive pickup, but then you lose your recon ship right after that, then in this scenario you get 30 points. Rebel player starts with 120 points. So they could easily just shoot down your recon ship and fly off the table edge and end up with a pretty good point advantage. All right, so that's one scenario. A different scenario is that The Imperial player plays it safe with their recon ship, leaves it behind, and sends the rest of their fleet to engage the rebels. This can also be tricky because at that point, no matter how cheap your recon ship is, it's not less than 10 points. So the rebel is always going to have more points if they're just fighting your forces with their forces. So they should be able to clean up your escorts eventually. The question is, how long? Because in the meantime, you can be picking up recon scan points, getting 30 points every turn just for, flying on top of or flying near and doing a little action. You could easily pick up these two in 2 turns as the Imperial player in this particular setup. So that you can be netting quite a few points with just this one ship in that scenario. So it's a bit of a balance. The most important decision, really probably for either player, is what is how to react to the other one. So the Imperial player needs to decide whether they're going to chance a direct engagement with the Rebel player or try to delay with your escorts. The Rebel player has to decide whether they're going to engage the escorts first or engage the recon ship first. And there's a lot of the choice really depends for each player on what the other player is doing at the time and what their squad lists look like. There's no, as far as I know, there's no straightforward play that you should be making every time. It really depends on what you're bringing to the table, uh, and how your opponent is setting up to attack you. One thing that you definitely want to think about as Imperial is making your recon ship resilient or just difficult to kill in some way. So you might want to make it you know, tough and tanky, or you might want to make it quick and nimble and hard to catch. Both those are good moves. Um, but whatever you do, you have to commit to it. Uh, if you if you don't have a coherent strategy for this mission, then it can go badly for you pretty quickly. And a lot of times in this particular mission, the point swing at the end of the game, the score at the end of the match, is dramatically favors one side. This doesn't tend to have a close finish. So what I mean is there's a lot of like 200 zip scores in this mission. The winning player often wins by a large margin, and you want that to be you, of course. All right, good luck.